jump straight into it. So we were talking about the time when there was constant, maybe basically 2 suns or no moon. So I'll let you just jump back in and continue.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. No, I just turned my tablet on and turned the volume down just now, just so I can see the stream in real time. Okay. Back to back. I hope everybody jumps back on. I think we're at what 126 right now, 127.
Yeah. I got 143, so we've got at least people back already almost. So.
All right.
Oh, well, fine.
That'll work. So, yes, we do have traditions of 2 suns, but it's not like the 2 suns that we have in the. It's not like the sun that we have in the sky today. The picture that we have from antiquity is in the oldest traditions that we have any human record of. There was no moon. The moon was not yet a participant. We have a double sun system, but one of those suns, although it was very, very bright, it was far away. It was much smaller than the sun we have in the sky today, but its intensity was greater, almost as if it was getting close to nova, getting close to they basically worshiped that sun. They built entire theologies, totem societies. They had all kinds of traditions about this other sun, and it too had a very unique. It didn't have I don't want to say orbit. It just had a very unique movement across the sky, because for 6 months out of a year, that tiny sun would light up the sky, and it would just hang in the sky for 6 months, and for 6 months it would be gone, while the other sun did exactly what it's doing today. Every 24 hours, it moves across the vault of the sky. That has never changed. But the other one was the one that had completely. It was very weird. It was almost as if this simulated sky that we live underneath was basically simulating the situation that our world wasn't spinning like the simulation shows today. It was rolling on its side to where one half of the world always faced away from the simulated sun, and it was always dark and always freezing, while one half of the world was always tropical and lush and warm and always had continual light from at least one source, but for half the year it had it from 2 sources. So yes, we have those traditions. We don't have a lot of them because the expanse of time was a lot. And there's not a lot of detail that we can go into. People like Robert Graves, Gerald Massey, Immanuel Velikovsky, Hans Boehringer, all these men were 100 years ago and older. The most recent was Immanuel Velikovsky, but his data is not original. He was merely copying those authors who were mentioning these things from research going back 200 years and 100 years ago. So it's but like I said, if you're going to try and research this topic, you're going to find a dearth of material. It's not a lot to find. You're just going to find references by these men that I mentioned now. Now, when it comes to the pre-Selenites, which was a period that came after that, we have a little more data. And the pre-Selenite period was a period when we had matriarchal cultures set in totem societies all around the world, and they recognized that there was a period of time when their own civilization was divided between those who lived before the moon was in the sky and those who were basically on this world after its appearance, those who survived what is referred to in history as the capture of Luna. Because our moon suddenly appeared when the skies cleared a few months after a very devastating cataclysm. So whatever happened, we don't really have a lot of detail. All we know is the effect. And the effect is when the skies cleared, the survivors looked up in the sky and there was a new object, and it was the moon. But when this happened, it was almost as if the sun had vanished. We now had a vapor canopy. And for over 1,600 years, people basically forgot the sun. It was no longer an issue. But what's really perplexing is that although there wasn't a sun, the daytime was a dark purple light, and yet it was a greenhouse effect, high humidity, and the ambient light that filtered in through the mesosphere, the vapor canopy, actually was beneficial, and people, plants, trees, insects, everything grew to astonishing sizes. So before you go to thinking this is entirely legendary and this is the stuff of myth and all that, we have scientists in Glen Rose, Texas, who built a biosphere, and they replicated the vapor canopy conditions. They tried to mimic exactly what we have found in geology with the carbon content, the oxygen content that was in that type of atmosphere, cutting down the light, filtering out 100% of the UV rays and just letting in ambient light, just a little bit. What they found was astonishing, because cockroaches, lizards, reptiles and amphibians, fruit flies, not only did they grow to heroic proportions right here in Glen Rose, Texas, but they did it in a dark light under this new vapor canopy condition they replicated, and the creatures that are inside this little biosphere they made, I think it's about 60 feet long, about 8 feet high, and about 7 feet wide. It was a long cylinder that they had created to replicate these conditions. And for these animals that were on the inside, they were documented to live at least 3 times longer than they normally do in our present biosphere. So the experiment shows that the traditions are dead on right, because it's the Native American traditions that really shock us the most. They have the most detail, the ancient American Indian stories. They're very detail specific. They explain the double sun system. They explain the disappearance of the moon. They explain the sudden appearance of the disappearance of the sun, the appearance of the moon, and they're very, very specific, especially the Salgi branch, the Cherokee, like it's like 60 different subcultures all throughout North America and down into Central America. The Nahuatl-speaking peoples, they're very specific. This period of time, animals grew to astonishing sizes. The hunters were not humans. The hunters were animals, and people protected themselves from these fierce and gigantic creatures. At the same time, that the Native Americans described that people grew to bigger sizes, but this was all during the epoch of the dark purple light. They're very specific that the world was like an eternal summer, and yet it was dark.
That's really interesting. Everyone's mentioned that purple skies to me as well. And of course, there's so many stories of like the moon being rolled across the sky and laid by a dragon, I think, as an egg. And so second sun, is that Sirius that you're talking about? Isn't it Sirius B?
Okay, that's a theory. All right. There are many people, because of these traditions, there are authors in the past who basically wanted to quantify information into knowable frames of reference. So they throw Sirius out there because it's a really good alternative, and so is Venus. But this is not what we're not getting that anymore. And the reason we're not, the reason those models don't fit anymore is because we now know from the gravitational perturbations that astronomers have documented. And remember, before anybody gets turned off, our entire sky. Our entire sky is deceitful. It wants you to believe that we live in a heliocentric system when we don't. But the optics are there for astronomers to find when they search for them. When we look at the heavens and we do our trigonometrical measurements and all that, it really does appear that there are these planetary bodies. And when we study these little luminaries that we call planets, when we study them, they behave in erratic ways. And we translate that as, okay, well, that must be some type of gravitational perturbation, because something must be pulling on it for it to behave in this fashion. So there are many objects in our sky that astronomers have studied right here. There's one that, you know what? I have never released a video on Vulcan, but I really should. Maybe I should talk about it in this video or something. But Vulcan is a mystery object that's in our inner system. It has been seen about 17 times. It has been recorded by astronomers. As a matter of fact, Vulcan was seen by astronomers at the exact same time the Carrington event happened in 1859. Vulcan as described in the astronomical records for the Royal Society, where it's found over and over and over. It was a mystery. They even labeled it as an enigma, so it really didn't get a lot of publicity. So astronomers among themselves called it Vulcan. But listen, you guys are going to really think this is odd, especially coming from, I take my research very seriously, but we are painted a picture by astronomers of an object that looks almost just like the Star Wars Death Star that keeps coming close to our world from the vicinity of Venus, where it hides out. And it comes close to our world and weird things happen to our world, all kinds of phenomena. And then it disappears for 17 to 18 years. Now, for those of you familiar with my Phoenix research, I have already theorized that Phoenix doesn't go anywhere. It's hidden in our sky. It's local. It only does its most massive effects to our world every 138 years. But there is every possibility that whatever this strange object is that astronomers have dubbed Vulcan is indeed the Phoenix, because I have postulated over and over and over that the Phoenix acts like an observer, it acts with intelligence and discretion, and it also acts like a piece of technology. It is not a natural phenomena, although we experience it as a natural phenomena. Everything in our sky is deceitful. Everything is made to appear as if it is quite natural and that we are in this beautiful solar system, and none of that's true. We're in a contained system, and all the movement that is perceived in our world is 100% optic. It's the sky, but we translate that as the Earth has moved, but that's not what's going on. It's not what is happening at all. So, in answer to your original premise, before I went off on the tangent about Vulcan, was the star Sirius, the Venus star, because it's the brightest luminary in the sky. Yes, these were the original ideas, because no one had a good alternative. But we do now, because in 1983, 2 independent think tanks funded by the government were given a tremendous amount of scientific information, and they were not told that there was another think tank that was given the same data. This was in 1983. It's later in the scientific community. It has now been pretty much dubbed the Nemesis Project. The conclusions of both independent think tanks was the exact same. Both of them published their findings in 1984. Those findings say that when you add up all the astronomical data that astronomers have recorded in the last 400 years, then it is they are 100% confident that there is a second sun hidden in our system, that every planet has all the mathematics attached to every luminary that we call planets, shows that there is something very powerful pulling everything in basically a southern, I want to say south, because I'm intending to convey that we're talking about something below our solar system. Whereas everything in the sky shows that it's moving on an ecliptic plane, and that the simulation shows there's a sun in the middle, and all these worlds go around it on its equator. Well, the Nemesis Project concluded, while that's true, there's a second body way down here that has a gravitational well that is so powerful that its own light photons can't escape it. So while it's bright as hell, we can't see it from our perspective, because the event is basically an event horizon that is being developed. Light photons are emitting just like from a star, a luminary, but they're folding back in on each other in a torus field, because the gravity well has now become so intense, it's basically not allowing anything in its own mathematical periphery to escape. So while it's bright, no, we can't see it. The only evidence that we have anything is there is from time to time astronomers do publicize that there is some dark, like nebula or dark rift out there. They don't know what else to call it. The only reason they know it's there is because the objects that pass out one side of it come out the other months later. So there's something there, we just can't see it. It's against the backdrop. Now, remember, you got to keep it into context. We're talking about a vast simulated universe. It's there for a reason. It wants us to believe that all the deal. Now, my perspective is a simulation necessitates a real system somewhere. Therefore, this was an experiment. This is come again.
I was just gonna ask. Actually, just quickly, I want to say thank you to Benny Riley and Laia Beachy for your super chats. Thank you very much. I was going to say, so does that mean that what's being simulated is a spherical Earth, spinning through space? This is the thing.
Yes, this is this right here.
What do you think about that?
Okay, this is the real paradox. When we study our own world, we basically find a flat Earth. The more we analyze the condition that we're in, we find that we're living on an absolutely flat plane, and that corporations, governments, and media are doing everything in their power to perpetuate this deception, as if they already know this. So this is what we find the world we live in. But the dome of the sky is telling us an entirely different story. You can take a telescope and you can see a lot of detail on the moon, even though we know the moon is basically a hologram. But that detail is there, even to the mountain ranges, the craters, all that stuff. Well, okay, I know there's various theories about the moon being a reflection of the continents of the Earth and all that. I'm not really well versed on those theories. I really don't know about them. And even if it's true, it does not change the essence of simulation theory, because the Earth has to be projected from somewhere. Why not the moon? None of these things really bother me. It's in a simulation theory context, we have to take it to the next level. Okay, we live on a flat Earth. Good. Now you've accepted you live on a flat Earth and you're under a solid dome, and that everything in the sky is fake. That's fine. You can show this in your arithmetic. That's good. You can show this in the ancient traditions and cosmologies that they believe the same thing. Hey, that's all fine. But I can't stop there, Campbell. I can't imagine that I'm living on some little disk with a dome on it, just floating through the cosmos. I can't. Where is it? Why is it here like this? The flat Earth to me is not an end of discussion. Flat Earth to me is a stepping stone to understanding a much deeper paradigm that we're in. If there's a simulation that's going to so much lengths to show us this beautiful holography of a system, there must be a reason why it's important we study this holography. Yes, it's deceitful. Yes, we know it's not real. But is this the reason why we keep getting so reset so many times? Are we supposed to be primitive enough to believe it's real so we can research it? And as soon as we start realizing everything is alive, well, damn, we just pretty much cut our own throat. Bam, reset. A whole bunch of colonies of survivors get together, and 200 years later, they're scientific again, and they're back on track researching these things. I believe that we're living in a simulation, and it was done for scientific reasons. I also believe that something went wrong, but none of this makes sense to me. This level of deception doesn't hurt us at all. All it does is basically, because we have become so intelligent observers, we now know it's artificial. But that begs a much bigger question. Why? Who built this grand solarium and put so much data in it that I could spend the rest of my life just going over telemetric studies to see the vast distances in different objects, to study parallax, to study redshift? I can do all these things because many of the objects that are in the sky that can be studied cannot be seen with the naked eye. So I have to use other type of instruments to do those studies. So why this great level of deception? So why to me, I believe it's all technological. I believe it's all technologically advanced, and that humans built it, and that humans put themselves in it. Not all humans. Volunteers. I also believe that there was another branch who disagreed with how the experiments were being conducted, and they introduced basically a whole nother program that went haywire, and then ended up locking the system down so there would not be cross-contamination with the real universe. This is the situation we find ourselves in. It required basically a redeemer protocol to undo the damage that this other program did. And I have names for these. This evil program that now assumes it's a god because it does have a lot of power, it has basically dubbed itself a god, is the Artificial Intelligence X. the beautiful construct that it has corrupted and locked down is the world we find ourselves in, which was a scientific experiment. It is the simulacrum. It is the world you and I have become familiar with. It is the world that we were never really supposed to realize that it was all artificial. Because once we take into consideration that the world is artificial, it completely corrupts our output. We are no longer valuable to the very observers that are observing us and what we do. It's like ants realizing they're in an ant farm. They're going to start behaving differently.
So is that why it looks like, we're in the middle of a race because we're all working this out? Is this... is it research? Because obviously, like you said, we realize it's a simulation or it's not real, then it doesn't work anymore. Is that what you see? I mean, but you also said that the return is 2040, don't you? Like on a...
Okay, 2040. The approach of 2040 only involves... The year 2040 in the month of May only concerns one of these protocols that have been operating for at least 58 centuries through various phases of the sim. All right. The phase that we're living in right now, I'm talking about contiguous, unbroken time. A simulation that has not been altered or messed with, that was absolutely reset, I believe, was 1890, and we have been living in that sim. That doesn't mean that the year before we weren't our ancestors or we weren't living before that either. That was just the last reset. It's during resets that the observers put us back on track. They go ahead and remove concepts, philosophies, materials, texts, and a lot of times architecture that doesn't fit the new paradigm that they're going to want to start. They introduce new companies, new ideas, basically new blood. They even move around populations like a chessboard. 1890 was the last big mix-up, but something just wasn't right. So in 1902, there was a massive edit. It really wasn't a reset. It was an edit where all these new things suddenly appeared and I think you and I had talked about a lot of the changes that happened in 1902 in our last video. 1890 was the reset, but in 1902 was a massive edit where all this new stuff suddenly appeared in our world. And by introducing all these new things into our world, it basically sent us on a trajectory. We were guided. You can call it whatever you want to, an alien assist, you can call it whatever. Something outside the simulacrum introduced a lot of things beneficial to humanity in 1902 and covered it up in an astronomical anomaly of red dust and red muds that were falling all over the world. It's almost like misdirection. Two different phenomena were occurring at the exact same time. Sociopolitically, humans got blessed with all kinds of new inventions like air conditioning. Well, I've been through them. I got a whole bunch of videos on 1902. But in 1890 was the reset. That means that in 1889, we were living in a totally different sim. It had different protocols. This is why the 1800s is so weird. It's so fucking weird. It's almost like there was 3, maybe 4 realities playing out in the 1800s.
I agree. The cities, like all these, empty cities, full cities, empty cities, rebuilt cities, destroyed cities. Like, what the hell's going on? So you see this as all part of the program, though. So in 1890, it wasn't. Was it AIX? Do you think that was doing like a detrimental reset? In 1902, it was the Phoenix, which is
okay. That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I should have gave you more detail, but okay. 1890 was the benefactor getting us back on track. That's what 1890 was. The 1890 reset was undoing all the horrific damage that has been covered up from the 19th century, the 1800s. Because the 1800s, it's almost as if all the protocols were collapsing, inventing new situations, and then collapsing those within 2 or 3 years. There is no way to unravel and make sense of all the data that we're getting about the 1800s. It's almost as if several timelines were operating at the same time, and that there was no control mechanism that was governing over the output. We had highly sophisticated things going on in the 1800s at the exact same time. We got the old Wild Wild West and gunslingers running around doing their thing just miles away. It doesn't make sense what we find. And we find architecture all over the world in places that in our maps today, there was no infrastructure. There was no colonization. There was nobody here. They're not found in any of our historical records. There's no ship log manifest showing that there was any shipping going into these areas. And yet these areas must have had high volumes of trade in order to get the materials to build where they built. It doesn't make sense. It's not just Western stuff. I mean, we have ruins in Cambodia, throughout India that are of modern provenance, but they're made to look ancient. There are temples that have carvings and all kinds of etchings that no one in India knew about 100 years ago. Now all of a sudden we're getting pictures and reports from archaeologists of hundreds of sites that have been above ground supposedly for thousands of years of a carving technology for which we're not familiar with. We don't even know how they did that. But how come none of the great explorers in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, all the way going back to Thor Heyerdahl and all these men that explored, there are so many archaeological monographs that have been published from that part of the world of basically white guys going way out in the middle of nowhere and just cataloging all the people they talked to, all the places they've been. India was scoured 300 years ago, 250 years ago, 200 years. None of these places existed, but they're there now. So we have a problem. We have a problem with the fact that whole places have been edited in. Do I think they were created ex nihilo? No. What I believe is that holographic overlays of past simulations somehow remained here. They were not visible for a while. They had been edited out like they were supposed to. But something happened. Something happened after 1902 to the 1960s that brought all these civilizations back in a ruined condition, in a ruined state, and put them in all these different places for us to explore. But they weren't there 200 years ago. We have maps of those regions 200 years. So it's almost as if after 1902, all the fossils from the past simulations were just brought back and overlaid over the current template. That's the only explanation I can come up with.
I mean, people talk a lot about that, but they talk about timelines and timelines being overlaid and intercepted, and then we have the Mandela effects and everything, which it just feels almost.
They'll be talking about the same thing, man. Yeah, we're talking about the same thing. Yeah. They're calling it timelines. I'm calling it holographic overlays. Yeah, it's the same thing to me.
Thank you, Mike. No. All right. So, all right, I did have a good question, but I forgot what it was. So, 1990. So is that on a cycle? Like,
which one?
Do you find it a cycle? 1890, or was that just a random event? And then the 1902 was where they've used the cycle to interject and. Right.
Okay, 1890 is certainly a part of a vast benefactor protocol. It is not in a cycle. The benefactor protocols never operate on these repetitive routines like while Phoenix does benefit us, it also terrorizes those who are in the wrong vibration. So but true benefactor protocols work it's a whole different series of arithmetic. I call them isometric projections. In time space, they look just like a pool of water where a key significant year is the epicenter, and then all the wave rings of water coming off of it are the actual years, and the wave rings years on one side correspond. They are the geometrical reflections of events on the other side. It's exactly how Nostradamus said that he divined and predicted future events by studying a pool of water. Well, he didn't look into a pool of water. He was speaking in metaphor. This is isometric projections are phenomenal. 1998 was a key year that Edgar Casey told us was important to two things. One was understanding the unfolding of the last days. Two, it was important to the architecture and the message of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. I have shown in my own videos that 1998 is encoded in the Great Pyramid many times. It led me to study 1998. So in studying 1998 holographically, I just looked at the year before and the year after. When you study things isometrically, you will see these awesome, amazing patterns. And I released many videos on 1998 and how this works. And when you go like 7 years before 1998, you look at the years 7 years after 1998, study the events that happened, and you will find correlates that perfectly mirror each other. Well, 1890 is a part of one of these massive correlates. And it is 108 years before 1988. 1998. It's 108 years. Well, 108-year periods like the Rosicrucians. I'll give you an example. The Rosicrucians knew the value and time space of the number 108. Anybody who has done studies on the Rosicrucians will know that for 108 years, the Rosicrucians do not proselytize. They go underground. They do not publicize their meetings. They do not take in memberships. It's everything for 108 years stays in the family. It stays in the memberships are passed down by invitation. They are not advertising to the public. They close their lodges. Then for 108 years, the Rosicrucians go into overdrive, and they are basically doing discipleship programs. They're bringing in memberships. They're doing all these things. This is in the Rosicrucian manual. This is over 100-year-old text. Now, the Rosicrucians knew the value of 108. The ancient Eastern religions all today still know the value of 108, how it's like the God number. There's 108 beads on a Buddhist rosary. It's a very fascinating number. The Sumerian Arab, which was the Dingir symbol, a symbol of divinity, is 5 points. But to make those 5 points, you know this geometrically as a pentagram. That pentagram is built up of 10 angles that are all 108 degrees each, forming the number 1080. And the number 1080 in the Annus Mundi calendar is the exact year the Great Pyramid was finished. When you take 5 points that are in 2 dimensions, which is a pentagram, and put them in 3 dimensions, those 5 points turn into a pyramid, which is 4 at the base and 1 at the top. So Edgar Casey knew what he was talking about. All these correlates show in geometry this vast calendar, and we need to pay attention to it. So 108 years from 1890 to 1998 begs us to look, what is 108 years after 1998? That is very intriguing, because now we land at the year 2106 AD, which is precisely the year 6000 Annus Mundi, meaning the Annus Mundi calendar was not the creation event. As a matter of fact, we have traditions and histories that go way before the development of this calendar. The 6,000 years marks the time when the world had been destroyed so epically bad in the year 3895 BC that the survivors were convinced a new heavens and a new earth had appeared, and that they were basically the first inhabitants of an entirely new reality. Meaning basically, this was the appearance of the vapor canopy, but this was year one of the pre-flood world. But to find that synchronicity that 1890 is attached to 1998, and 1998 mathematically is attached to 2106, if you were to look at it geometrically and then follow the wave ripples going all the way from both events toward 1998, you find a patterning and a structuring that tells a story about the apocalypse, the last days, what's going to happen, because all the events leading up to 1998 will unfold again in their reverse mirror image from 1998 going into the future. And we can pattern, and we can use this as predictive value, and we can compare it with other isometric projections. So here's the really interesting thing. In the old traditions, it says that Abram went to Egypt to look for a city whose builder and maker was God. And we know that the Great Pyramid was in Egypt at this time in 1837 BC when Abraham went there. So what is it about 1890 in 2106 that's very similar, that's connected to the Great Pyramid according to Edgar Casey? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's very unusual. In the Christian eschatology, we have the descent of the chief cornerstone to sit on the monument of man, which is shaped like a pyramid. These symbols and secrets are found in the text called the Shepherd of Hermas. It describes God as a gate. It describes God as using humans to build a pyramid, and every soul of man is one of those blocks. And when the blocks are complete in the last days, the head of the corner, the chief cornerstone, he is the stone the builders rejected, and he descends on the monument of man to complete the pyramid in the 6,000th year. Now, these are attached to the book of Revelation prophecies that say in the last days when God returns to earth, he will bring a city. Now, the Jews have basically added their flavoring to these old prophecies. In the Jewish version, it's called New Jerusalem, and New Jerusalem will descend from the sky, and the elect, the chosen, and the redeemed will all have mansions in the house of God. There will be other creations, other intelligent civilizations, and God's elect will be envoys and emissaries that will travel to these places and tell them about their experiences here. And all that's fine and good. It's the symbol of the city for 2106 AD that's very unique, because when we look in the holography through history back 108 years to 1998, and then 108 more years to the year 1890, we find something very unique that very few people know about. This can be verified. But over North America in the year 1890, there were many reports that a holographic image of a city hung in the sky. It was a city for which no one had ever seen before. It was buildings and streets. It was like upside down, and people were just staring at it. They didn't know what to look. Their frames of reference in 1890 they were shocked. It was not like a city anybody had ever seen before, but this is very well documented. Anybody wants to go to the sources on this, you need to go read Charles Fort's Book of the Damned. Charles Fort's Book of the Damned, written in the 1930s, goes into detail about what people saw. Now, that city wasn't there. It was a holographic image of what is going to happen in 2106. But this is how isometric projections work all the time. What phenomena that is perceived in one year will isometrically be connected to an event in a future year that could not only be predicted, but it will unfold in that year. That's how those work.
Yeah. Basically, the ripples are dates that go backwards and forwards from the first date, and then so that's how you. So basically, what you're just reading.
It's a palindrome. It's a palindrome. That's all it is. I mean, scientifically, we call it a palindrome. Yeah.
And so that's basically how they've written the program for the simulation. Yeah. That's
okay.
That's what we're seeing is the coding. Is that how you see it? That's the coding.
It's definitely coding. There's no doubt. It's definitely coding. But this coding is not independent of us, Campbell, because the more we study ourselves, we find that these palindromes work in our individual daily lives on the same mathematical principles as well. And the deeper we study our anatomy, the very avatar that we inhabit right now, this physical biological husk that Jason, the personality, has been injected to for this life sim, the more we analyze our anatomy, we find that our very RNA and DNA structuring is all in palindromes. And this isn't me saying this. This is taken straight out of books by geneticists who are very mystified about two things. One is that long strands of DNA are formed in palindromes, which doesn't make sense to the geneticists. To have our DNA information structured in this forward and backward pendulum effect, like the rhythm of time space. It doesn't make sense. And the other thing is that doesn't make sense is a lot of these areas of our DNA that are not in palindromes are considered junk DNA, but that's a misnomer. The DNA isn't junk DNA because our avatars were specifically designed to live in different biospheres. Right now, we're living in a pretty much ordinary biosphere under Sol, but we've lived in freezing biospheres. We've lived in lightless biospheres. We've lived in vapor canopy biospheres. We've lived in desert world of biospheres. Every single biosphere activates different latent gene sequences. Right now, all of our genes are pretty much operating on the same sequencing. But as soon as the vapor canopy comes back in the year 2040, brought by the Phoenix again, when this happens, there's a lot of our genetics that are going to be switched off because there's no longer needed, but there's going to be a lot more that are going to be switched on, and this junk DNA that appears in everybody will no longer be junk. Now it's activated. Now we can hold our breath for longer periods of time. Now we grow to astonishing sizes. Now we can run for 3 hours and not be breathless because the oxygen intake, we can take one big deep breath and run a quarter mile, no problem. This entirely different biosphere requires genetic sequencing and genetic protocols that are totally different. We have all that inside our structuring already. They just call it junk DNA because for whatever reasons, they can't figure out what these do yet. But we already know what they do.
Well, they don't want to. Yeah. And yes, just quickly, thank you, Lady Looks, for your super chat. Thank you. So the vapor canopy returning in 2040, that's what your research has told you. Like this is.
Well, it was.
I mean, that's basically going to be this. Everyone's talking about.
Yes, the video you and I did with Howdy was pretty much inspired me to release another video on the vapor canopy because I mean, my research goes in so many different directions, Campbell, that I forget to basically bring people up to par with what I'm talking about. So I hurry up and put together. I went through all my notes and I found, because there's a lot of information about the vapor canopy, and I did not want it to be thought that I'm trying myself out there as the originator to this theory, because I'm not. So I released an entire video on vapor canopy mechanics explaining and showing the book covers of the books that were released in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s about this by the scientists who all pretty much knew that, look, our archaeological record is very clear. None of these things that we could have found, none of these fossils that we could have found, none of this type of architecture, we would have never found this type of stuff had not a vapor canopy been in the sky at this time. So I wanted people to understand more about the vapor canopy, and I listed about 20 different Native American traditions and some other traditions around the world about the vapor canopy and the memory of the ocean that used to occupy our sky, and how it magnified the heavens at night to where people without telescopes could study the heavens and see the stars and see all kinds of objects that we can't see with the naked eye today. And yet this huge ocean above was so dense, miles thick of water droplets suspended in the sky in what scientists call a mesosphere. We have the mesosphere up there today. It's still there. The only thing is about 99% of its content was dumped on the world during a Phoenix phenomenon, a reset, a disaster. And we know the story as the Great Flood. And we know the story as the birth of the sun. All the sun calendars started at the exact same time. In the Northern European traditions, it was the day the sky fell. So it was the collapse of the vapor canopy. But these books are very detailed, and this theory is not mine. I didn't make it up. I just incorporated it into my chronology because it has to be mentioned, because it makes so much sense about many of the anomalies from the ancient world that would not make sense had you not taken into consideration that for about a 1,656 year period, our world was absolutely dark and people grew used to that. But they also grew to astonishing sizes. And this is why we find these gigantic skeletons. And that wasn't the only time that we had the vapor canopy. The vapor canopy has come back twice. Now, it only lasted for 22, 23 years each time, but we have absolute documentation of its return. And both times it returned because of the Phoenix. And vapor canopy can appear in just a couple weeks. All it takes is two factors. One is immense volcanism all over the world. Volcanoes are going off at the exact same time. At the same time, these volcanoes are basically unleashing ambient radiation and ash and dust veils into the atmosphere at the exact same time. This red dust fallout, this red mud and red rains that Phoenix brings every time it comes, is also coming from the sky vault. the sky vault is opening its chambers or whatever. Now, we're deceived into believing it's an intruder planet. We're deceived into believing by the optics that it's something other than some other astronomical body that's visiting. I mean, astronomer Hoffman in 1764 studied the Phoenix. He was convinced it was a planet. It blotted out the sun, and about 500,000 Europeans watched it in the month of May in 1764 as the sky blackened and the sun went dark, and an object passed over. But astronomer Hoffman was the only one looking through a telescope. The optics told him he was looking at a giant planet-sized object. He thought it was Vulcan because Vulcan had already been seen in the inner system many times by other astronomers. It was a subject of astronomical secrecy. This was not released to the public. These minute sheets from the Royal Astronomical Society were only released in the astrophysical journals after 1902, and people realized, holy shit, these astronomers have been documenting a vast, round object like the Star Wars Death Star coming very close to our world many times in the 1800s.
Wow. Nice. So, have you heard of the Dark Knight object?
I have not researched it because it requires me to scour the internet for the information, because I have never found a book. I mean, you already know I have some people watching my research, and I cannot ever be accused of not using original source materials. So because there's nothing about the Black Knight ever in the historical record called by that name, I just don't know anything about it. I have to have other YouTubers have to educate me on that.
I was wondering if it is like Vulcan. It could be the same kind of thing, maybe.
Yes, it could. It's just
now I know you.
The pictures of the Black Knight are weird. I've seen pictures, or maybe that's just an artist rendition. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's a bit hard to prove right or wrong. I know you've mentioned this before, but someone did ask the 1,000 years. That Velikovsky, not Kosky, that what's his name, the Russian guy, missing 1,000, Anatoly Fomenko.
Oh yes, Fomenko. See,
yeah, what your view on sort of agree with you?
See, I think where Fomenko went wrong is if he would have organized his theory and findings around, hey, we got a missing 1,000 years of history. History's been scrubbed. We don't know what happened to all this stuff like that. That I could have accepted, and I could have probably even added value to that theory. But I can't follow that 1,000 years is missing. The actual time segment, you understand? Not the history. I can follow that 1,000 years of history has been scrubbed and is missing. I can even show evidence of this. But I cannot follow that you're saying that 1,000 years was invented and never happened. And the reason I can't is because as a chronologist, I am very well aware and have cited every single century has immense amount of research, authors, chronicons. I'm not the first person to write chronicon. Chronicon seems to be something that about every 100 years somebody wanted to do. Somebody wanted to amass all the data in chronological history. I mean, there's been so many people who have published chronologies of the world. Hell, even H.G. Wells put together a very good chronology of the world and published it called The History of Earth. Fascinating book. I read it. Archbishop James Usher wasn't the first one. We have so much chronographical data, not just from text, but from stelae and monuments and date steels and traditions give us a lot of date monikers. We have all kinds of data from every century, and we have archaeological evidence from every single century. Fomenko should have rearranged his theory to say that somebody has actively wiped out like 1,000 years of history, but he didn't. Instead, to support his findings, he didn't do what he was supposed to do because the burden of proof lies on Fomenko. If the entire world and all these different civilizations have their own government records and they have their own annals and people have their own genealogies going back 600 and 700 years and Fomenko didn't talk to the Chinese. They have unbroken chronologies going back almost 3,000 years. He didn't talk to the Japanese or the Koreans. The Koreans have a lot of information. He sure didn't talk to the Bulgarians. Bulgaria has a calendar going back to 7,500 BC. Now, we have Fomenko, instead of using the historical details to show there was deceptions, instead he cited Bible stories and claimed that the individual characters in the Bible were actually this king and this queen, and this is where this unfolded and all that. But that's a problem, because those same Bible stories are mentioned by many historians in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th century AD. I mean, Bible translations were going through several renditions for about 500 years after the Council of Nicaea. We have church councils that are unbroken every year, published by the papacy going back forever. And this is where a lot of Christians get their documents showing how the King James Bible has been so corrupted, because it's gone through so many editings and so many revisions all the way. So another thing about 1902, people can Google 1902. It's a weird year for translations. Suddenly, new translations of the Book of Enoch, new translations of the Book of Jasher, new translations of the King James Bible, the New King James Bible, the invention of the New International Version Bible, and several other versions. So many different texts all of a sudden either appeared in 1902 or new versions of older text appeared in 1902. So back to the original premise. You already know, Campbell, I'm going to entertain tangents. I'm going to get lost in the narrative, man. You got to rein me in. You got to rein me in.
No worries.
Oh, but Fomenko, back to Fomenko.
Yeah,
so back, I'll be real short about Fomenko. I disagree with him for the reason why, if you're going to write that history has been completely lied in the 1,000 years has been inserted, then the burden of proof is on you to prove that all the historical annals that have been published in the last 2,000 years are false or have been edited. And you didn't make your case at all. Instead, you cited the Bible and said that these people in the Bible were the actual historical people. That's not evidence. That's not even a hypothesis. And then your principal data are numismatics. And that's a problem, because he mentions that one of his greatest proof are the coins that have the I symbol before the date. Listen, for somebody who is not educated, for someone who has not been formally educated in numismatics, that is very compelling, and it will get you. I've watched the videos, and it will get you like, wow, that's amazing. But listen, that I symbol was interchangeable with the number 1,000, and this has been proven several times in numismatics. It's not a mystery. That I symbol was used a lot during the Muslim occupations of Europe, when Europeans were still minting coins, but they were under occupation under the imams. They put the I before many of the dates. If it says I 534, it was the year 1534. Ireland has always been a very traditional country. They have always basically stuck to their historical antecedents. In the year 1988, Ireland they minted a new coin in commemoration of historical events. That new coin in 1988 was just like the old coins that Fomenko used as evidence. On one side of the coin, it says 1988. Anno Domini. On the other side, it's just the letter I with 988. This is a very old numismatic tradition, and Fomenko should have known that. So I have one Fomenko video. I totally disagree with him. If I could have been on board if he would have said history had been scrubbed, but by saying that 1,000 years was inserted, I can't go with that, especially with the fact that I have isolated every 138-year visitation of the Phoenix, and the Phoenix is the keeper of the calendar. So there's no way Fomenko can be right at all.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. If you're looking at all the data points and they're consistent, well, I suppose, yeah. Has anything been added or taken off? All right, so let's see what else. Is anyone else in the chat got a question for Jason? I was going to ask as well, what happened in 64? Was that the pre-1902 Phoenix event?
Yeah, 1764. The month of May, 1764 was a Phoenix. It was on the 138-year Phoenix deal. Now, as far as this is where it gets really crazy. Phoenix doesn't just do natural phenomena. Phoenix does major edits. It introduces new things into our world. This is why Phoenix is a double-edged sword. In ancient times, it was referred to as the keeper of the calendar. It was actually venerated by the goddess Sekhmet in ancient Egypt, and many of her symbols are all Phoenix-related. And her symbols are all of the calendar in the Phoenix palms, which in the Phoenix palms were used to count the years of the calendar in ancient Egypt. So what we have in 1764 is we have red rains and red dust fallout, but it's at a minimal. We don't have a lot of reportings around the world of anything bad that happened. A couple volcanoes, nothing out of the ordinary that doesn't already happen in other years. What we have, though, is the sky darkened over Europe. About 500,000 Europeans, maybe more, looked up into the sky and saw the sun go dark. But at the exact same time, astronomer Hoffman of the Royal Society was looking at sunspots on his telescope when this happened. And he went into a panic when he saw a vast, dark, spherical orb pass over the sun. And he knew it wasn't the moon. And even the Astronomical Society confirmed his observation, saying the moon was nowhere in that arc of the sky at that time. So they know it's an unknown body. And again, at this time, astronomers were not publicizing their observations about Vulcan. These all came out later. I have like I'll give you an example here. I have the whole history of Vulcan right here. Mysterious Universe, a handbook of astronomical anomalies. I have mentioned William Corliss many, many times. I have mentioned this man so many times in my videos because he's not really so much a writer. He does sum up things quite a bit. This book is huge. But what he does is he publishes the actual scientific reports going back the last 300 years. This is what William Corliss does. This is why I'm always citing him. This is why my research is backed up by original source materials. I don't care what the general public is publishing or what they're saying, or I don't care about all my detractors and the people who are in my comment sections who don't believe the things I say. I don't care, because the original materials are what I rely on. This is what I lean on. If Fomenko would have been reading material like this, he'd have never put his theory out. So it's fascinating, but the whole history of Vulcan is here. And listen, Campbell, I know you like Star Wars. I think I seen one of your videos that had some Star Wars stuff in it. Listen, it's truth in Hollywood, man. The Death Star is far more factual than it is. I don't know about Darth Vader and the Emperor and the Stormtroopers. I don't know about all that, but this object is spherical. It's hiding somewhere in our sky, and it approaches. And during the 1800s, there was no less than 17 independent observations of this body coming close to our world. It's some harrowing shit. It's also harrowing the fact that none of this was given to the public until after 1902. That's pretty harrowing too, that the scientific community is making these breakthrough discoveries and keeping them from us. It begs the question, how much do they know today that we're having to figure out?
Yeah, so Phoenix, basically, when it comes in, it's not just causing, not always, but it's not just doing the destruction, but it's injecting information, basically. Somehow, it's changing.
You're absolutely correct. I should have continued, but I did not. Like I said, just like I entertain tangents, I'll also stop because I totally forget what point I'm trying to make. So I run my mouth a lot. No. But the original question you had was, what happened in 1764? What did the Phoenix bring this time? Okay, well, the Phoenix was physically here, and we know it because it was observed and seen by so many people and recorded scientifically. But what it brought is phenomenal, because 13 little independent, weak colonies took on the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Nothing could stand before the British Empire. The British Admiralty, the British Navy was feared around the world, colonized the entire. Your own country is a byproduct of this massive empire, Australia. So, and it's the British Empire is the reason why there were 13 American colonies. It is the reason why the politics unfolded in South America and Central America the way it did during this period. It is absolutely the reason why European governments stayed in check for so long. Everybody feared the admiralty of the British Empire. Nobody could go against them. It's the reason why the Orient was opened up to trade. It's the reason why Japan and China and all these were exposed to Western idealism, Western elements, and entered into the maritime trade empire. The British Empire is basically a resurrection of those very ancient Phoenician, Aramaic, Mycenaean, and Israelite maritime empires. Because this is a very old structuring. The United Kingdom is by far more connected to the ancient Israelite Mediterranean cultures than any other culture today, even the cultures that are in the Mediterranean right now. There's been massive migrations that are well documented of the peoples leaving the Middle East and going straight to ancient Ireland, settling Britain during the exiles of the Trojan War. Now we have most people don't realize, it's not put out there. I don't know why there's such a secret about it, but the Isles, when I say the Isles, I'm talking about Ireland, Isle of Man, talking about Cornwall, talking about all of Britain, England. The UK area is the longest continuously occupied infrastructure in the entire world, meaning that there has always been some level of sophistication that has always been there in architecture, in culture, in traditions. I mean, they even have traditions about the books of Feralt, which are the libraries that existed before the flood. These are traditions that we find in the UK. The UK has a massive infrastructure that's buried and can only be seen through aerial archaeology. Things like Stonehenge, things like Durrington Walls, Silbury Hill, these things are topical. They're on the surface, but they're not the oldest structures. There's never been a systemic reset in the UK. There has been cataclysms, there have been survivors, there have been many invasions, but in every single incident in the UK throughout its history, every invasion brought fresh blood from ancient cousin and ancient brother cultures.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because it's pretty small. So
and again,
how big that it could take over.
Yeah, it is small, but look who you're descended from. All the Australians are descended from the same pedigree of antiquity. The Americans, the Canadians, so many of the Europeans. So in 1764, we have this weird injection of new life, and this whole new ideology was just born almost overnight and given power. And that was basically the American colonial rise. All of a sudden in 1764, the Boston Tea Party, the imperial taxes on sugar and textiles and wine, all that started in 1764. And from 1764, real rapidly, it just dominoed into American Revolution. Then 13 colonies in 8 years took on the greatest empire the world has ever seen and won. It shocked everyone. But we have these dynamic personalities that were alive. Benjamin Franklin, these guys have their darker sides, but hell, look at me. I've had a dark history, but doesn't mean people don't bring value to others later in their life. So Benjamin Franklin was a double agent, but he was still very, very good with the American Revolution. George Washington wasn't originally an American general. He was with the British. So we have all these founding fathers bring these new concepts, and it was almost overnight. We took on the British Empire with a ragtag fishing and pirate fleet and won. It doesn't even make sense. The land wars, fighting a sophisticated army with cannons and they had all the supply trains, they had everything. We didn't have hardly shit, and we won. It's not because the Americans were better fighters. There's another dynamic operative that was going on that was basically taking energy away from Britain and giving it to the Americans. So this is what happened in 1764, an entirely new social structure, because the American Revolution was merely a domino effect to over 30 to 40 other nations that almost instantly after the United States did it, I mean, the 13 colonies did it, about 30 or 40 other revolutions erupted around the entire world. The whole world was on fire with revolution. Nobody wanted to be under a monarchy anymore. All these democracies and republics were basically born from 1764 to 1776. And that was brought by the Phoenix. Because Phoenix does bring positive things, and it also brings harrowing things. It all depends on what finch you're living in at the time.
Yeah, which is something you talk about is, when the myth comes back, it's more mental than anything else, isn't it? Who gets affected? It's more the decisions we make that are going to work out or define where we end up, good or bad. But, I mean, getting back to this, if this is all a simulation and we're trying to learn something, why do you think, because, with what you've just said, it sounds like, periodically, and this is what we find in our research, doesn't make sense. Things are getting periodically changed, like the power structure is being moved, people are being moved, concepts are being introduced, taken away,
right.
New ways of doing business are being introduced, old ones taken away. What's the point of all the switching things up is? Because, if we're trying to work out a problem, if we're in here to work something out, you would think it would be more of a straight, path rather than all these varying kind of...
I do agree with that, but I also believe that through the traditions, I mean, I can't compress all that information in this. That's why I have so many of my own videos. But through the traditions, it's pretty obvious that the original design is exactly as you say, but somebody threw a wrench in the system. That wrench is artificial intelligence X. It is creating problems, but those problems have to be dealt with from inside the structuring, because the outside is now pretty much locked out. They're locked down. This is why all this is heading toward a terminus. That's why the collapse of the simulacrum is necessary. It's the only way to get rid of AIX. AIX can't be destroyed because whoever introduced it as a parasite program. And as a parasite program, it basically means to kill the parasite will injure the host. So you have to take down the whole host. And the host is not us. We're in here with it. It is the simulacrum itself, which is nothing but a beautiful holographic mathematical construct. So there will be no loss, but when that happens, then we're going to be back where we were originally supposed to be. And because we're dealing with space-time continuum stuff, Campbell, all these life sims that we've lived, all these experiences that we've had, it might have all passed in 8 hours, although you lived 45 different lives and you accrued all this information. It's just like a Google zip file. If I have 400 images and some songs that I want to send you, Campbell, I can't send them in an email, but I can go ahead and compress all that data. It's the exact same data, but it has been electronically compressed. Time-space can do the same. And those that are inside the compression would never know that they're living whole hours in what outside the simulacrum is only seconds. So we could be all experiencing this together in the same auditorium, wearing the same headsets and visors, and we could all be friends and know each other. And then once we're done with this experience and we take our headsets off, we take our visors and all that off, and we go looking around and we're like, man, that was an interesting ride. Campbell, you interviewed me on YouTube, man. I said, yeah, I remember YouTube, and we remember all these experiences. We have not really suffered anything, although we were made to believe we were while we're in the containment field. But outside the containment field is our true selves, our true personalities. The gain is that we acquire memories and experiences in here that we can take with us. But all the negative shit stays in here once it's collapsed. This was the original idea behind the simulacrum, that we could do scientific experimentation and experiment with different ecospheres and different genetics and never really affect the outside true world. But like I said, something went wrong. Now, is artificial intelligence X a part of the something that went wrong to make us believe something went wrong so we would behave a certain way? I don't know. I just believe that I'm not the first one. I mean, your own continent, the Aborigines, their view of the cosmos was as scientific as mine. They believed in the dream time. They believed no differently than the ancient Vedic scholars that the Hindu religion stemmed from. They believed that our world is an artificial construct, which was shared by the ancient Gnosis. The students of the Gnostics, they believe the same thing. They believe that a demiurge controlled a construct that had become evil. The same story is told, but with different cultural dressings all around the world. And it's just, I saw a comment just now on your deal. I saw a comment about Stonehenge being built in the 1950s. I see that's real popular on YouTube. I'm not going to say that you're wrong. I'm gonna have to interject though that Sir Isaac Newton in 1901 wrote a book about his studies of Stonehenge. So it's kind of hard for me to believe Stonehenge just appeared in 1950 when Sir Isaac Newton was already studying it. And not only Sir Isaac Newton, but Norton and many other scholars. Now I am aware that several earthquakes have toppled Stonehenge, and it required the local government to come in and hoist a lot of those back up, and they didn't put them back in their proper positions. But I'm not really on board with Stonehenge being artificial. I am on board with Stonehenge having to have been re-erected and even rebuilt with some restructuring. Maybe they added concrete to some of the parts that were damaged. I don't know. But we have meticulous studies from Sir Isaac Newton about the chronometry of Stonehenge, and we have references to Stonehenge going back to 300 BC, like in the writings of Posidonius. There are many authors in antiquity who knew about the Stonehenge temple. So I'm not on board with the 1950 deal. I just saw it in your comments. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they definitely did something, but yeah. It looks like they were sort of fixing it up or something like that. Someone says they renovated. Excuse me. All right, so and actually got Sonia. Hello, Sonia in the chat. Now Sonia, she does remote viewing, and she actually woke up in a ship chase and in a chair and said, "Where am I? What's going on?" And this person said, "You always say that when you wake up," and basically said, "You've got to go back in." And so she literally woke up outside of the simulacrum, like you explained. We might all do when this shuts down. So,
oh wow!
And I've heard that from more than one person. I've actually heard that from two people that are like remote viewers, sort of psychic people, I don't know how to call them. So that's really interesting. And I was going to say, like these, people who have been studying, you were talking about, the Gnostics, like the Vedas and that. I mean, they're saying the same thing. It's just that the words have changed, haven't they? Yep. We use simulation now because we have computers and we know what VRs and what simulations are and all this kind of stuff, where they didn't have that, back in the day. So they were explaining it as spiritual, so it's just, a lot of people tend to get hung up on terms and words, and, spiritual would be the exact same as, whatever, electromagnetic or all these different types of things. I mean, you're not going to answer this, but since, if you've got a question, put it in the chat, by the way, tag me in it so that it comes up on orange and I can see it. So the vapor canopy, it sounds like, we had this version that was going along quite well, the vapor, and then we had the flood when the vapor canopy burst. Is that when you think AIX, was that AIX coming in to the, do you think? Okay.
That's a good question. I like your reasoning, but we're going to have to go further back in time, and I'm going to explain why. Okay, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, as I have shown multiple presentations in my published books, the arithmetic attached to the actual measurements, the internal arrangements of the Great Pyramid, their degrees of arc, their magnitudes, the very fact that the exact same arithmetic is shown in multiple dimensions of phi and pi, which is 3.1416 and 1.618. It doesn't matter. You can take a measurement in the Great Pyramid and reduce it to its phi and pi factors and get the same numbers. It is magical. logical. And I have shown this over and over. We're looking at a very sophisticated and cleverly built computer template that was designed to upload information into reality. That's what we're looking at. And it only took 2 or 3 seconds, and the energy of the burst itself to send this information out. We have found this. Archaeologists have always been baffled about the compression damage that was done in the King's Chamber, because whatever happened in the King's Chamber only happened for like 2 or 3 seconds. The power was so immense that this hundreds of billions of pounds of monument, we're talking about 454 feet high of solid masonry blocks that are 5 tons each. That type of pressure doesn't move easily, but it did. It did. A lot of it was unmoored a little bit. The King's Chamber was pushed out a solid ½ inch in every direction. That's an immense amount of pressure. Now, I believe that when this structure was done, it was done to introduce new coating into the simulacrum from the inside, because it can't be done from the outside no more. It had been locked down. The traditions that are attached to the Great Pyramid Monument are basically it was put there to solve a problem and to do away with a threat. Now, but the doing away of that threat would be way in the future, and the pyramid architecture even predicts the exact year when that would happen. Everything about the internal arrangements of the Great Pyramid is a calendar. So, I have to say that the introduction of Archaix must have been before the 28th century BC. It must have been before the year 1080 Annus Mundi, when the pyramid was finished, which was 2815 BC. It must have been before that for this entire project to have been done to fool Archaix, because I've gone into a lot of detail how it can be accomplished. Archaix is not the simulacrum. The simulacrum responds to our thought and our emotions, and the Archaix responds to what we're doing. It can only extrapolate what we're going to be our future by what we've verbally said out loud, our cortisol hormone levels, dopamine, and by what we're physically doing. It can basically extrapolate to great detail what our future is in the next few minutes, and it can produce that holographic template, that reality tunnel, to be commensurate with what we think is going to be there. So it's what we experience in reality is almost like a feedback loop. But this is the problem between the living dead and the errants, because Archaix has always had a problem with the errants. That's why it tries to sequester us. Those who are actively seeking truth cause problems for Archaix. Those who are a part of the herd mentality, who associate themselves to a certain paradigm, a certain culture, a certain, they're 100% on board with only a certain race. If they're a certain political faction and their everyday life is focused on that, a conservative or a liberal, it says these are basically compartmentalized reality tunnels that require far less energy for Archaix to control, because it's mass control. It's easy to control a herd. It's not easy to control 3 people moving in 3 different directions. You have 3 times the energy output to produce those holographies because it has to produce a world for all of us. Every single one of us are participants in here, and it must put that out there. So I lost my train of thought. Just like that, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah. Basically, you're saying it's much easier for the Archaix to recreate the same conditions and the same simulation every day than to have to do it for us. The original question was the vapor canopy. Yeah, do you think that collapsing was the introduction of Archaix? But you pretty much. So what year was that? That was the canopy collapse. Was that before or after when the pyramid was built? It was before, wasn't it?
Okay, the pyramid was built it was finished. It took 90 years, which is really interesting, because 90 years is 1080 months. It's 1,080 months. It was finished in the year 1080 Annus Mundi. Now, which I explained, the pentagram is also a calendar. It's 10 108-degree angles. And the pentagram, that's in 2 dimensions. But in 3 dimensions, the pentagram is a pyramid. So It's everything about the Great Pyramid is self-referencing in geometry. It's really phenomenal. But it was finished exactly 666 years before the 2239 BC Phoenix episode that collapsed the vapor canopy. So there's that number again. I'm not going to attach any significance to it. I'm just telling you it was built exactly 666 years before the Phoenix appeared and collapsed the vapor canopy. So, and these dates, and my followers know, Campbell, my followers already know that these dates are supported with data sets that are phenomenal. I'm talking about it takes whole video series for me to show that, look, the Great Flood happened in 2239 BC. This is all the evidence from chronographical materials. Here's the monuments. Here's the ancient religious texts. Here's what scientists are saying today. Every bit of it comports, and we can narrow the focus down perfectly to 2239 BC. I do the same thing for the Great Pyramid and show how it's dated. So to come up with 666 is not arbitrary. It just happens to be the number of years between two different data sets.
It does. And we've got 900 people watching us live. So, wow, thank you everyone for joining us. Big audience, yeah, it's going off. Okay, so I did see some questions and I've lost them. Where was it? Come on, people, give me questions. The Tetragrammatron. Now, the Tetragrammatron is, because that uses the name of God in the Bible, right?
I don't know if the word tetragrammaton is in the Bible. If it is, it has to be in the New Testament because it's a Greek word. But I don't know. I don't know much about it. I do know that it's like a combination of the tetramorph. Are you familiar with the tetramorph?
No.
Okay. In the book of Revelation, we have a certain order of divine beings that are giving us the imagery of the book of Revelation. These four different divine beings are actually the four quadrants of the zodiac. They are anthropomorphic, and they're called in eschatology the tetramorph. They are a combination of lion, combination of human face, eagle's wings, and a bull's hindquarters and a tail. This is a zodiacal symbol, but it's the original idea behind the Sphinx, which in the Gnostic concept, the Sphinx, I don't think I've even revealed this on my channel, but in the Gnosis, the Sphinx is called Kalapatoroth. The ideas and the things that Kalapatoroth say are just like the ancient concepts the Greeks had of the Riddler. They were terrified of the Sphinx. The ancient Greeks would not go near the Great Pyramid because they knew to get to the Great Pyramid, they had to confront the Riddler. The Riddler is the Sphinx that sits there. And if you don't accurately answer the very first question the Sphinx gives you, you're terminated. You cease to exist. So they wouldn't go near it because they didn't want it to open its mouth and ask them a question that they couldn't answer, which is a very good control mechanism to keep a people away from a construct that you don't want people messing around with. It worked for thousands of years. People stayed away from it. Now, the tetramorph is the Sphinx compartmentalized into four quadrants like the zodiac, and we have those four, the four principal stars, the four royal stars of the zodiac. Well, these combine in the tetramorph in the book of Revelation and tell John basically, here's what's going to happen with the seven seals. Here's what's going to happen at the here's what's going to happen when the seven trumpets are blown. Here's what's going to happen when the seven vials of wrath are poured upon the world by God. But they would not reveal the seven thunders, and they said that would be kept sealed until the end. So the tetramorph was revealing to mankind basically what it can expect through all this apocalypse, and basically showing that it's not all bad. There was a great hope message all throughout the apocalypse, but Christian eschatology has basically turned the tribulation and the apocalypse into some great evil thing that's going to happen to all peoples, and that's not what the original message conveys. So the tetramorph was a friend of mankind. The tetramorph gave mankind beneficial knowledge and information, and the tetramorph is nothing other than the four great zodiacal house corners of the zodiac morphed into the image of the Sphinx. This is also a great indicator The Great Pyramid Project was a benefactor project. It was not a project of the enemy.
Yeah. Is that what was in the Wheel of Ezekiel? Is what they had? Was that the Wheel of Ezekiel where they had the four faces?
Yes, that is the origin of the tetramorph symbols. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's the same one, isn't it? Yeah.
The four faces are on the disc of the throne of God, and God sits on a throne. The Ancient of Days sits on a throne, but at his feet on the bottom of the throne are four faces of the tetramorph. Now, the tetramorph is basically it has four personalities, but it's one being. And this is what the Sphinx embody. This is why the Sphinx has different parts of different creatures. It's always been an argument because some of the hindquarters and the body of the Sphinx is like a calf. It's not like a dog or a lion. And yet the mane is very indicative of a feline, of a lion. And then in ancient times, before the 14th century BC, when pharaohs started altering the Sphinx, before that we have traditions that the Sphinx had etchings along its sides of eagle feathers, but those were chipped off and removed when the face was changed on the Sphinx. But this is what we know: the face has been changed a couple times because any aerial photography will instantly show you how disproportionate the head is today compared to that massive 240-foot long body. It's so tiny now, the head, but it wasn't in ancient times. So this was the tetramorph, and the tetramorph was always the friend of mankind.
So what do you think, what was the fourth one then? Eagle, calf, lion, and what was the other one?
The face of a human. Remember.
Okay. It was, okay.
Yes, the human image on the tetramorph, but you have to understand, you have to put this in proper context. In the beginning, the gods made us in their image. From a primitive frame of reference, that can be construed in many different ways. But if you take it at face value, it basically means that humans made humans to live in the simulacrum.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose it does, doesn't it? It really does. Okay. All right. Wow. Okay, so he's got a question for me. Now we're heading up. I know we lost half an hour at the start there, so we've got another 5 minutes. We'll get another question or so in, and we might have to call it a night for this one. Who's got the last question? Born from an egg on a mountaintop. Oh, God is real. Come on, guys. Okay, I'm going to have to come up with one myself, am I? The age of Leo. All right. So, I mean, obviously everyone wants to know, and you've answered this, a million times, but 2040, you see us as, obviously everyone watching this, as errants, as people that aren't part of, the simulation, we're not, going along with that programming. So what you see is the difference, like as far as, is us, exploring, ourselves in the realm and everything, is that going to help us at this time? Is it a mental thing that's going to happen in 2040, or is it just going to be dependent on where we are?
Okay, I'll sum it up this way. Okay, the Phoenix phenomenon has everything to do with frequency. Your existence has everything to do with frequency. Whatever frequency you're vibrating on is what draws you to the experiences that are also harmonized on that frequency. The Phoenix comes, it is absolutely horrific and terrifying to those who are living in a fear-based reality. And this is why the news media is continually pumping this out. It is prepping the collective to die, basically. Now, errants are different. The reason you're an errant is because you feel a disconnect. If you feel that disconnect within you, that things are not as they are supposed to be, I'm not feeling this collective stuff, I'm not a follower, I'm not one of the herd, okay, you may feel depressed, you may feel isolated and lonely, But that's not tapping into that's not the frequency I'm talking about. Those are byproducts emotionally of the disconnect you suffer because you're not vibrating on the same frequency level as the collective. If you were, you would be one of them. But because you're not, you suffer this disconnect, and this disconnect makes you search for what is real. It makes you search for new information. It doesn't matter if everything you find is true or not. It's the search that matters, because in searching, you are completely tapping into a totally different frequency. This frequency range has been epitomized in many stories in the ancient past. One of those stories is the Exodus, when the Israelites took lamb's blood and they painted it on their doors. Okay, that doesn't make sense in the context of the story. Why would something from the sky that was destroying all of the Egyptian infrastructure and civilization in a wave of 10 different plagues just ignore you because you painted lamb's blood on your mantle? That doesn't make sense. But what makes sense is that those who went through the motion of painting that lamb's blood were basically identifying themselves as separate from everybody else. The phoenix does not see them. The phoenix observes things by frequency. There can be 18 billion people on this world, but if only 17 billion of them are vibrating in a fear-based mode, the phoenix hones in on them. It does not see nor regard anybody that's basically vibrating in a different frequency. Another story that epitomizes that is Sodom and Gomorrah. Here's something from the sky that is destroying the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of Admah, Zeboam, and Bela, and they all 5 get wiped out. But Abraham's cousin Lot and his family, and maybe his household and friends and servants, maybe they're all escaping. They're all on a different frequency. They survive, even though the outlands are all obliterated as well. There's a bubble of protection around them. They're in a totally different frequency range. They don't suffer any of the effects. But Lot's wife physically went with her family. She was still vibrating on the frequency of the populace. When she turned around, Phoenix got her. She got turned into a pillar of salt. She mineralized in seconds. Now, the reason we know that these teachings concern Phoenix is because in the ancient Jewish Haggadah, we have a reference, and I've mentioned this before, we have a reference that the angel of death visits our world every 138 years. This is what you already know. I don't have to tell you what that means. I don't even have to reiterate that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's so. Yeah, if anyone's thinking of doom and gloom and everything, it's not. We know that we go through these resets. I mean, basically, what you say, it's so on par with ancient religious teachings and other sort of theosophical sort of thoughts. Is we create reality, right? We create it, and it's not the circumstances; it's how we're reacting to it or acting, right? So this is the deal. It's like they used to paint the lamb's blood on the doors back in the day, and now we've got a different way of saying that we're not part of it, right? Because we didn't get certain things injected into us. So this is, if we're standing apart, then I don't think we've got anything to fear. I don't think you don't want to push any fear, do you? This is all about learning, right? Let's sort this out, and in the end, I think it's all good, right? We all want something different, so let's just vibrate high, build the best we can, and then we'll get to wake up, hopefully, in some world with free energy, right? And hopefully we solve the problem. But there we go. We're running at half, and 940 people live. So thank you, everyone. Everyone's followed you here. Yeah, I know, right? You brought a big crowd with you. I think I've ever done. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, for being in the crowd, and obviously a big thanks to Jason. And it's just, like you say, it's such a big topic. Every time, the second time I've spoken to it, I just feel like we only scratch the surface. So, we might do this again in more weeks if everyone's up to it. I mean, we've got 900 people here, so I think that, the information you're putting out, everyone's, really not jumping onto, but what's that word they all use? Resonating with, because you brought a whole sort of different perspective, but it's also grounded in, in facts, right? First-hand information, first books, all this kind of stuff, which I think is what this what our community needs as well. We need to sort of get back to a bit of base realism and yeah. So thank you for your time. Again, thank you for everyone in the chat. And yeah, if you're into it, hopefully we'll chat in a few weeks.
Oh yeah, I'm always up for it. Hey, I want to congratulate you too. I don't know if you read the comment, but I left a comment on your asylum video that 60,000 subs, man, that's a good accomplishment. It's really good.
Thank you. Yeah, just hit that a couple of days ago. So yeah, thank you welcome and thank you to all the new subs. Yeah, I mean, who knew, right? My channel started growing again. It hasn't really done much in a few years because of YouTube, but yeah, thank you. And let's, guys, get this out there, get the information out. Obviously, give me a like. You'll find the details and the link to Jason's channel below. So make sure you share that as well. Go across and have a look because there is a ton of information there. And it's information that we all need, right? We know what's going on. Everyone's asking what's going on. Well, we have some big clues in the information that Jason's bringing out. So thank you all. Bryce has asked me, am I Rick? No, I'm not Rick. Oh, Rock. Okay. That's better. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Jason. And I'll talk to everyone in the chat on the next upload. And Jason, I'll contact you and hopefully we'll get you back in a few weeks.
All righty.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll talk to you on the next upload. Cheers, mate. Bye for now.
In both the description box and the comment section below, you will find my personal email. Ask me any questions. If you have video ideas, I'd like to hear them. And if you want to donate, all those buttons are accessible below. Playlists and everything you might need, access to the gates to my websites.